My name is Maya Jackson. I'm 32, an accountant in DC, and the kind of person who prefers quiet nights over glittering crowds. Yet here I was, standing at the grand entrance of the Four Seasons in Atlanta, my stomach tightening as I gazed at the ballroom that was more palace than reception hall. This was my sister Khloe's wedding, a day that had been months in planning, a day that had been drenched in crystal, gold, and power. And I was not invited. At least, that's what they wanted me to believe. I approached the registration table, a polished mahogany monolith that seemed designed to intimidate. Two staffers, their faces carefully neutral, hovered over glowing iPads, tapping and swiping as if the very life of the party depended on their perfect performance. I took a deep breath, smoothing my navy silk dress, a simple, elegant choice that now felt painfully inadequate amid a sea of sequins, designer gowns, and dripping diamonds. I smiled politely and gave my name. Maya Jackson, I said clearly, hoping my calm voice would mask the sudden spike of nerves in my chest. The staffer looked at me, her professional smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. She tapped on her screen, scrolling, frowning. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name? It isn't here. Could you repeat the last name again?" "Jackson," I said. Jackson. Maya Jackson. I'm the bride's sister. Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her otherwise composed face. She whispered something to the other staffer, who cast me a quick, horrified glance before disappearing behind the massive doors of the ballroom. I stood there, stunned. My stomach felt as if it had dropped into a pit, my heart hammering against my ribs. That's when I felt the whispers, like snakes in the grass, soft and venomous, curling around me. "Is that?" "That's Denise's other daughter, the accountant one." "How embarrassing." I wanted to shrink into the floor, disappear entirely, but something inside me refused. I straightened my shoulders. My mother, Denise, was smirking from across the room, eyes glittering with something I recognized too well: superiority and control. "Did you really think you were invited? Strangers aren't allowed," she said, her voice smooth, almost amused. I smiled calmly, even as heat rose to my cheeks. "Then I'll live like a stranger," I murmured, and turned toward the doors. The ballroom swallowed me whole. It was aggressively opulent, a display of wealth and influence that made my quiet DC life feel almost laughably modest. Towering floral centerpieces of white orchids and cascading crystals loomed over tables covered in shimmering gold linens. Guests moved like they were on a stage, their smiles precise, their laughter measured. I felt out of place in every way, yet strangely this was the world my mother had clawed her way into for decades, and the world my sister now occupied, fully funded by her new fiancé, Ryan Peterson. I had chosen a different path, one they called boring. I had chosen independence, responsibility, and quiet dignity. Working as a government accountant might not sparkle like a diamond-encrusted invitation, but it gave me something no designer gown ever could: a life I had built on my own terms. Across the room, I spotted Aunt Vi. She caught my gaze for the briefest second. Her eyes widened, a flash of recognition, or maybe shock, before her lips curved into a tight, disapproving smile. Then she deliberately turned away. I could feel her judgment, sharp as a blade, cutting through my carefully constructed calm. I swallowed and reminded myself why I was here: not for approval, not for recognition, but to show that I was not the difficult, inferior daughter they all claimed I was. Returning to the registration table, I stood tall. The young staffer looked up again, trying to maintain her professional demeanor. "Welcome to the Peterson-Jackson wedding. May I have your name, please?" she asked, her voice a little too bright, too forced. "Maya Jackson," I said again. The words felt heavier this time, filled with years of frustration, of invisibility, of being cast aside by the family I should have been closest to. Her smile faltered, her fingers hovering over the glowing iPad screen as if it might suddenly provide a miracle answer. I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name isn't listed here. Could you? I'm the bride's sister, I interrupted, my voice firmer now. Maya Jackson. Jackson. My sister is Khloe. For the first time, her professional calm completely shattered. She whispered urgently to the other staffer, who darted off again, leaving me standing alone. Guests behind me shifted, their whispers rising like a tide. Is that really her? How did she get in? The accountant daughter? My brain couldn't process the humiliation. I felt it physically, a hot slap radiating across my cheeks. That simple moment, giving my name, should have been an introduction, a warm acknowledgement of my place in the family. Instead, it was a public erasure. My existence had been denied at the very threshold of my sister's perfect world. And yet, I felt a strange surge of something new, not fear, not shame, something colder, steadier, resolve. If they wanted to treat me like a stranger, I would become one, but on my own terms. I would not cry. I would not plead. I would walk in with my head held high, silent but unmistakable, a shadow in the glittering light, a reminder that I existed even if they refused to acknowledge it. I took a deep breath and stepped past the staffers, past the whispers, past the judgmental eyes. I was here, uninvited, unacknowledged, and yet completely present. As I crossed the threshold into the ballroom, I could hear the faint buzz of my mother's phone somewhere in the distance, insistent and relentless. I didn't yet know what that would mean, but I felt it, a ripple in the perfectly staged world she had built. Something was about to shift, and for the first time in years, I felt like I might have the upper hand. I stayed at the edge of the ballroom, letting my eyes wander over the glittering scene before me. The Four Seasons in Atlanta had never looked so aggressively opulent. Every detail screamed wealth and control, from the towering white orchid centerpieces dripping with crystals to the gold-accented linens that shimmered under the chandelier's cold, clear light. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a declaration of status, an exhibition of power disguised as a celebration. And I, Maya Jackson, the boring accountant, had somehow become the uninvited observer of it all. Whispers followed me like shadows. Guests leaned toward one another, eyes darting in my direction. Is that really her? The accountant's sister? Why is she even here? Every syllable landed like a tiny sting, but I refused to flinch. I had survived years of being minimized by this family. I had learned the subtle art of walking through fire and keeping my dignity intact. Across the room, I caught sight of my mother, Denise. She was the picture of composed elegance, her designer gown glinting in the crystal light, her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. But her phone kept buzzing insistently in her hand, vibrating against the gold clutch she clutched like a shield. Denise's eyes flicked down at the screen, and I could see the first cracks in her polished facade. Something was wrong, and her carefully constructed world of control was starting to wobble. I observed my sister, Khloe, floating through the crowd like she had been born to this life. She laughed at jokes I couldn't hear, smiled at faces I didn't recognize, and held Ryan's arm like a trophy. Every move screamed perfection, the kind of rehearsed elegance that comes from privilege and obsessive planning. And yet, for all her beauty and poise, there was a tension around her eyes that betrayed a flicker of fear. Fear that her sister, the one they had tried to erase, was now here to witness it all. I wandered through the edge of the ballroom, letting my presence be known without needing to announce myself. Every glance I caught from the other guests felt like a small victory. They were starting to realize I was not just an invisible figure, a footnote to this wedding. I existed, and I was here to stay. At the bar, I overheard snippets of conversation that made my stomach tighten. Did you see her? Her dress is simple, isn't it? I can't believe Denise let her in. It was clear the family had underestimated me. They had thought that by excluding me from the guest list, by erasing my existence from this carefully curated day, they could maintain control. But control is fragile when someone refuses to be invisible. I noticed Aunt Vi, now, seated at a corner table, her back deliberately turned. She glanced at me surreptitiously, eyes narrowing, then quickly looked away. The disapproval was sharp, but I could see the uncertainty flickering beneath it. For years I had lived in the shadows of their judgment, always the quiet, responsible one who never caused drama. And now, simply by standing there, calm and unshaken, I had become a quiet disruption, a reminder of all the years they had tried to diminish me. The staffers, overwhelmed and clearly unprepared for my presence, whispered urgently behind the registration table. They moved with the efficiency of people accustomed to control, but now their system had failed. My mother's smirk was faltering, and I could see the panic in her eyes when she realized the repercussions of her own hubris. And then came the whispers about Denise's phone. It rang relentlessly, an insistent buzz that pierced the hum of conversation and laughter. Heads turned, guests paused mid-toast, and my mother's hand trembled ever so slightly as she fumbled to silence it. I couldn't help but smile inwardly. A crack in the armor, a small victory born not of confrontation but of presence. As the evening wore on, I drifted closer to the center of the ballroom. I watched the couple exchange polite smiles with their guests, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension that my presence had created. I was uninvited, yet here I was, an undeniable reminder that their world of appearances, their golden fantasy, was not as flawless as they believed. A sudden wave of clarity washed over me. I didn't need to fight with words or confrontations. I didn't need to demand recognition. My presence alone, calm, composed, unbent by their judgment, was a statement far stronger than anything I could have said. I was no longer the sister they could ignore. I was here. I was visible. And I was unshakably myself. Somewhere near the stage, my mother's phone buzzed again. This time I noticed the color drain from her face, the slight hitch in her breath, the way her hands gripped her clutch like it might keep the world from collapsing. Whatever crisis was unfolding behind her curated smile, I knew one thing. The balance of power in this room was starting to shift, and for the first time, I had the advantage, not through wealth or status, but through simple, undeniable reality. I existed, and they could not erase me. And so I stayed, watching, waiting, quietly letting the storm I had entered begin to stir. The evening had reached a fever pitch. Crystal chandeliers reflected off the gold-accented tables, sparkling like stars in a carefully controlled galaxy, one that had always belonged to my mother, my sister, and their world of appearances. But tonight, that universe was subtly, irrevocably shifting. I remained at the periphery, silent but present. I had no intention of creating a scene, no yelling, no accusations. My strength was quiet, invisible, yet undeniable. Every glance cast my way, every whisper that fluttered behind my back, confirmed what I had already suspected. My presence had unsettled the meticulously staged world of the Peterson-Jackson wedding. And then it happened. Denise's phone rang again, louder this time, its shrillness cutting through the hum of conversation like a warning bell. She fumbled, her fingers trembling as she silenced it, but not quickly enough. Heads turned, guests leaned forward, murmurs growing, whispers circled. Is something wrong? Why is her phone ringing? Look at her hands. She's panicking. My mother's face was a mask cracking at the edges. Every polished smile, every carefully rehearsed gesture began to unravel before the eyes of the people she had spent decades impressing. For a moment, she looked small. Not the commanding, poised matriarch I had grown up under, but a human being, vulnerable and frantic. Khloe, my sister, noticed too. Her perfectly composed laughter faltered mid-word, and Ryan tightened his grip on her arm, glancing around nervously. The illusion of perfection, the golden, glittering fantasy they had built, was beginning to splinter. I walked slowly toward them, my movements deliberate, measured. I did not hurry. There was no need. Each step was a quiet assertion. I existed, I mattered, and I was unafraid. Denise's eyes met mine for the first time since the registration table incident. There was recognition, yes, but also fear. The smirk was gone, replaced by a tension that betrayed panic and uncertainty. My sister's eyes widened too, the controlled facade wavering. For 12 years I had been pushed aside, erased, rendered invisible by the family that was supposed to love me. Tonight, the tide had shifted. I reached them. "Hello," I said softly, almost tenderly. Not an accusation, not a demand, just a statement. I am here. Khloe froze, her lips parting slightly. "Maya." "Yes," I said simply, letting the word linger. The staffers hovered nervously nearby, unsure how to handle the situation. The whispers from the crowd grew louder, some guests subtly filming the unfolding tension. My mother tried to regain control, to smooth the edges, to restore the illusion. But it was too late. The illusion had already cracked. And then, the final blow to their meticulously orchestrated world. One of the guests leaned over and whispered something to another. Denise's phone had been buzzing relentlessly because of a last-minute revelation about the wedding's finances, a truth she had hoped to conceal, now exposed in front of everyone. The room stiffened, eyes darting between her and the buzzing phone. The golden fantasy was falling apart, piece by piece. I felt a strange satisfaction, not from revenge, but from justice. Justice of a quiet, inevitable kind. I had not schemed or manipulated. I had not plotted to humiliate anyone. I had simply been present, dignified, and true to myself. That alone had begun to unravel the family's carefully controlled narrative. Khloe's voice shook slightly. "Maya, why are you here?" I smiled, calm and steady. "Because I'm part of this family, even if you tried to forget it." The room seemed to pause, the air thick with tension. Eyes were on us, on the uninvited sister who had become the unshakable witness to the family's cracks. And in that moment, I realized something profound. My power didn't come from wealth, status, or approval. It came from existence, from resilience, from refusing to be invisible. I turned away, walking slowly back toward the edge of the ballroom. I didn't need applause. I didn't need gratitude. The storm I had entered had already begun to stir. Denise's smirk was gone, replaced by uncertainty. Khloe's golden world was no longer untouchable. And I was unshaken, dignified, present. The whispers continued, but now they carried a different weight. Where once they had been judgment, now they were acknowledgement. The accountant's sister, quiet, unassuming, overlooked for years, was finally seen. I found a quiet corner, letting the glittering chaos unfold around me. I watched my family, my mother, my sister, and their perfectly curated world, slowly realizing that control is fragile, that appearances can crack, and that truth, quiet or loud, always finds a way to emerge. And in that moment, I understood something I had long suspected. You don't need to be invited to claim your place. Sometimes, simply showing up is enough. The reception had ended, but the storm was far from over. The golden chandeliers dimmed, tables were cleared, and guests began trickling out of the Four Seasons ballroom. Yet for my family, the echoes of the evening lingered like smoke in a burned room. Every whispered conversation, every nervous glance, carried the weight of what had just happened. I stayed until the last guests had gone, watching my mother, Denise, meticulously check her reflection in a mirrored wall, adjusting her gown as if she could physically smooth away the chaos of the night. Her smile was brittle now, a sharp contrast to the confident smirk she had worn at the entrance. I could see the tension in her hands, the way her shoulders hunched slightly as if carrying the weight of failure, a rare and unfamiliar sight. Khloe approached me hesitantly. Her flawless composure from earlier had given way to uncertainty. "Maya, can we talk?" she asked, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I studied her carefully, noting the subtle tremor in her hands and the shift in her posture. For 12 years, I had been sidelined, dismissed, and erased. Tonight had changed that. I nodded slowly. "Yes, we can talk, but it has to be honest, Khloe. No pretense." We walked to a quieter corner of the hotel, away from the remnants of glitter and opulence. She sat on a plush chair, fidgeting with the folds of her gown. "I didn't. I mean, I thought." Her voice trailed off. I didn't interrupt. For once, I wanted her to feel the weight of her own words, to recognize the exclusion, the judgment, the deliberate erasure she had practiced against me. "I don't need an apology," I said finally. "I don't need validation. But I do need acknowledgement. I exist, Khloe. I've existed all along, whether you and Mom recognized it or not." Her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and confusion. I didn't realize it felt like this to you. I thought, you thought wrong," I said gently. "You assumed I'd always be the quiet, invisible one. But I'm not invisible anymore." Meanwhile, Denise lingered near the exit, phone in hand, scrolling frantically. The wedding had been a display of power, yet the cracks were impossible to hide. Guests whispered about her frantic handling of the situation, and social media notifications from the evening's chaos were already circulating. My mother had spent decades constructing a world of appearances, but tonight, her careful facade had faltered. And I had been the catalyst, not through malice, but simply by being present. I left the hotel quietly, stepping into the cool Atlanta night. The streets were empty, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement from an earlier rain. I felt a rare sense of calm. The evening had been a revelation, not just for my family but for me. I had stepped into a world that sought to diminish me and emerged unbroken, dignified, and seen. Over the next few days, the ripples of the wedding were felt throughout the family. Conversations were awkward, glances were heavy with unspoken acknowledgement, and my mother's attempts to regain control of the narrative failed quietly but noticeably. I received texts from distant relatives, subtly admiring my composure. Even Khloe reached out again, cautiously trying to bridge a gap she had allowed to widen for far too long. For the first time in years, I realized something profound. I had the power to define my place in the family, not through wealth, manipulation, or status, but through presence, dignity, and truth. I didn't need to fight or argue. I simply needed to exist authentically. And in doing so, I had claimed my space in a world that had tried so hard to ignore me. As I sat in my apartment later that evening, sipping tea and watching the city skyline, I felt a quiet victory that no dress, no chandelier, no wedding could ever provide. I had walked into a room that sought to erase me and left leaving a lasting mark. My family had seen me, not the image they wanted, but the truth of who I am. And for the first time in a long time I smiled, not in defiance, but in peace. The outsider had finally arrived, and she was unstoppable. Weeks had passed since Khloe's wedding, but the ripples of that night were still washing over my family, and over me. Social media. Posts from the event continued to circulate, each picture a reminder of the opulence my mother and sister had celebrated. Yet amidst the golden chandeliers, the crystal-laden tables, and the perfectly rehearsed smiles, My presence that night had left a mark no filter or lens could erase. At home in DC, I sat at my desk, reviewing spreadsheets for my accounting job, a cup of lukewarm coffee by my side. The contrast between my quiet, methodical life and the world of glittering extravagance my family inhabited couldn't have been more stark. But I realized something crucial. I had finally reclaimed a sense of power and self-worth that no gala, no wedding, no judgment could take from me. Then came the messages. Subtle texts from extended family, distant relatives, and even a few guests from the wedding. You handled yourself beautifully. We've never seen her so composed. Your mother can't stop talking about how poised you were. I read each one carefully, savoring the acknowledgement, not the empty praise, but the recognition of my presence, my quiet strength. My mother, Denise, called a week later. Her voice was measured, her usual confidence tinged with something unfamiliar: hesitation. "Maya, we need to talk," she said. I paused, my fingers hovering over the phone. I could feel her attempt at control, the years of carefully honed authority trying to assert itself even now. But I didn't flinch. I had learned that power doesn't always belong to the loudest voice or the grandest display. Sometimes it belonged to the quiet, steady one who refused to be ignored. "Okay," I replied, "but I want honesty, no games." The conversation was awkward at first. Denise tried to justify the past, to explain why I had been left off the guest list, to frame it as oversight rather than deliberate exclusion. I let her talk, letting the words roll over me, absorbing them without anger. I realized that acknowledgement, even belated, was a form of reconciliation. Khloe reached out too, hesitantly. We met for coffee in a small cafe near her home, far from the grandeur and spectacle of the wedding. She spoke nervously, her words stumbling over each other as she tried to find the right balance between apology and explanation. I didn't think about how it would feel for you," she admitted. "I thought you'd understand why we wanted to keep it small, exclusive. I never wanted to hurt you." I listened, nodding slowly. My anger had not disappeared entirely, but I realized that the true victory wasn't in forcing apologies or demanding recognition. It was in my own awareness, my own resilience, and the undeniable fact that I had been present when it mattered most. The shift in our dynamic was subtle but real. Invitations began to arrive for family events, not extravagant galas, but gatherings where my presence mattered, where my voice was acknowledged, and where my choices were respected. I felt my space in the family being reclaimed, not through confrontation, but through authenticity, dignity, and unwavering presence. One evening, I stood on my balcony, the city lights of DC glowing below me. I thought back to that night at the Four Seasons, the whispers, the stares, the invisible line I had crossed simply by being there. I realized something profound. I didn't need to be invited to claim my place in the family, in the world, or in my own life. I only needed to be present, to exist fully, and to refuse erasure. And for the first time in years, I felt a quiet, unshakable power. The power that comes from knowing your own worth, from standing tall in the face of judgment, and from claiming the space you deserve, not because someone else allows it, but because you exist. Maya Jackson, the accountant, the quiet observer, the outsider no more, had finally arrived, and nothing could make her small again.